Good day, everybody, and thank you for joining us as we continue to look at what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And yesterday in church, we looked at this passage in Matthew chapter 6, talking about the cure for anxiety. And as we went through that, what the main focus of that was really that in order for us to cure anxiety in our life and not to walk in anxiousness, is to place Christ and God the Father as the Lord of our life and give them that position of supreme authority in our life and to have them as Lord. And as we do that, we put our trust in them completely and we allow them to take control, because anxiety comes out of a place of feeling out of control and trying to control something and feeling like you can't, so you become anxious about it. And as we hand that control over to God and we give it over to Him, then that means we can walk in this feeling of security and safety in who He is and not feel like we need to be in control of every situation, because we know He's in control and that He's supreme and that He has authority, and that means that we can walk in who He is and free from anxiety. And as disciples, this is a place that we should be. This is something we should be doing. But in order to do that, we need to put Christ as the Lord of our life. We need to give Him that position in our lives where He has complete control. But I think something that really stops us from doing this sometimes is because we don't fully necessarily understand who God is and the characteristics of God, and we don't fully really believe it. And I believe the more we get to believe and know who God is, the more we can put our trust in Him, the more we can put our faith in Him. So over this next week, we're going to be looking at who is God and some of the key attributes that make up God and make up His character, that we can put our trust fully in Him. Because you wouldn't give your car keys to someone to go drive your car if you don't know them, if you don't know the way they drive, if you don't know if they're going to be responsible and be able to control your car. You don't give a 5-year-old the keys to a Ferrari, for example. No, because you know they're not going to be able to control it, because you know who they are. But if we don't know who God is, we're not going to give Him control of our lives. So in order for Him to give control of our lives to Him, we really need to know who He is. So that's what we're going to be looking at this week. And we're going to start by looking at what does it mean that God is a sovereign God. And that word sovereign means supreme power and authority. And that means to actually have power over everything, to have authority over everything. That there's nothing in this earth that does not fall under the power of God. His power is above every other power. His authority is above every other form of authority that comes across in this earth, comes across in the universe. He has authority over everything. It is supreme. It is above all. And that's what it means to be sovereign and to be a sovereign God. And in saying this, no one can hinder God. No one can stop God from doing what He desires to do. No one can stop God from doing His will. I want to read to you Isaiah chapter 46, verses 9 to 10. It says this: "Remember the former things long past, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is no one like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from the ancient times things which have not been, saying, my purpose will be established and I will accomplish all my good pleasure." And in this passage, just before that, it talks about that we cannot make anyone equal to God. It's saying that no one is equal to Him, and don't try and make anyone equal to Him. And then in this verse, He says, "Remember these former things, for I am God and there is no other." And He's saying there is no other God. There is no other one that has the same authority as Him. There's no other that has the same supreme power as Him. He is God and there is no one like Him. And then He goes on in that verse and He says this: "I am God and there is no one like me." There's no one that compares to who He is. We cannot take anyone else in this world. We cannot take any other being in this universe and try compare them to who God is and the power that God has. There is no one like Him. He establishes what He wants to establish, and nothing can stop Him from establishing that. And nothing can stop Him from living out and allowing His will to be lived out in this world. And that's what He is saying in that passage. And I just want us to notice this thing about the sovereignty of God, is that the sovereignty of God is not determined by how we see Him. It is determined by who He truly is. And so often we try to define the sovereignty of God by the way that we see Him and how we think God is, but not about who He really is, or how we see Him compared to others, or how we see other people, but not in comparison to who He really is. And so I want to say that again: the sovereignty of God is not determined by how we see Him, but who He truly is. And that's what one of the things I want us to remember about the sovereignty of God. Who He says He is, that's who He is, and He is sovereign. He is supreme power and authority. I want us to look at the story of Nebuchadnezzar, and we can read about this in Daniel chapter 4, verses 34 to 35. And this is just the end little bit. But Nebuchadnezzar, at this point, he's had this dream about this tree that birds nested in, this tree that cattle came and grazed under and found life from, that people found shade from and security and rest under. And this dream, this picture, was a picture of Nebuchadnezzar himself, this place where he had risen up as this king and this ruler, where people saw him as this place of security and this place of life, and that his pride was in himself, and there was this realization that he needed God, and God, this angel came down from heaven in this dream and spoke to this tree and said, you will be chopped down to your roots, and you'll stay there for 7 years, and you'll eat the grass like the cattle, and you'll be like that for 7 years. And it was talking about Nebuchadnezzar himself, and Daniel interpreted this dream for him and saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, this is you. And that's what happened to Nebuchadnezzar for it says for a period of 7 periods of time, for several periods of time, Nebuchadnezzar went out in the fields. This king, this ruler of a nation who ruled over everything, went out into the fields and he ate grass like cattle, and he had a mind of a beast, it tells us. And this is how he lived for 7 periods of time. And at the end of that period of time, he arises from the state, and this is what he says. But at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, but he does according to his will in the host of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and no one can ward off his hand, or say to him, what have you done? And here Nebuchadnezzar looks at God, and he realizes that God is sovereign. He realizes that God will do whatever is according to his will on this earth and in heaven and with the people of this earth, and no one can stop him from doing that. That God is sovereign over all. And then we also see, as we go through this, in Job chapter 42 verse 2, we see that Job, we know what happened to Job. His whole family was taken from him. His riches were taken from him. Satan went to God and asked permission to test Job. God said, yes, you can do that. Everything was taken from Job. And in this time of affliction and this battle with God and these conversations with God, Job started to realize that God was sovereign. And in Job chapter 42 verse 2, he says this, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. And that means that no purpose of God can be destroyed, or no purpose of God can be sidetracked or just torn down. And what he's saying is that he says, I know that you can do all things, that God is supreme authority, that there's nothing in this universe that God cannot do. There's nothing in eternity that God cannot do. He is supreme over all things. And even Job, in that point of affliction and that point of suffering, realized the sovereignty of God, and that all power is in God, and that he can accomplish that anything his will desires to do, that is what will be accomplished. And I want us to notice this about the sovereignty of God, and that is that divine sovereignty signifies that God is the one who sits on the throne of the universe. Divine sovereignty signifies that God is the one who sits on the throne of the universe and nobody else. And he has complete supreme authority and power over what happens in this universe. And I want you to notice that he is the God over all things, directing all things in accordance with his will. And we can read about that in Ephesians 1 verse 11. And we need to understand that there are certain parameters to this, and that's certain things that God cannot act outside of his character. So God cannot lie. Even though he is sovereign over all things, he cannot lie because it is not in his nature to lie. And examples and things like that, things that are not in the nature of God, he cannot do. But anything else that is in accordance with his will and his power, he can do. And I just want us to notice that it doesn't matter whether we're on a mountaintop in life, whether we're in a good time and an amazing time, or whether we're in a valley. No matter whether we're going through the hardest time of our lives, we need to recognize that God is sovereign over everything. And God's will is accomplished in everything. And he will lead us, and he can guide us, and we need to put our trust in Him as the Lord of our lives and give over the control that we are trying to control and give it over to Him, because He will lead us in everything. Have a great day. I pray that you'll grow in your knowledge of who Christ is through this and in your relationship with Him. Thank you very much.